Charlotte police have released body and dash cam video from the Keith Scott shooting. And this is footage you're about to see from one of the officers' body cams. Protesters have been asking for police to release this, plus the dash cam video, since Scott was shot and killed Tuesday. Both police, Scott's family, and even the city's mayor have said that those videos don't offer many answers in the overall investigation. Let's take a listen to that video.
Legacy gripping his hand. Gripping his hand.
Back up. I got right gun. Back up. Back up.
You on? Huh? I don't know. Hey, somebody get my bag and start getting some equipment.
Where's your bag, dude? You good?
Just take it back in my trunk.
You good?
I'm good. Get some
Good.
gloves.
And what you're about to see right now is the dash cam video. Let's take a listen. We want to bring in now Dimitri Roberts, former Chicago police officer. He's on the phone with us right now. Dimitri, I take it you've had a chance to see this video. What do you make of it?
I am reviewing the video now as we speak, but what I can say is up until this point, there's been sketchy information given by the Charlotte Police Department, by the chief of police, and further, this still says that where is the appropriate level of use of force or the justification for that use of force. What I do know is that a suspect backing away is not justification for a lethal use of force. Further, these officers had multiple chances to de-escalate this situation, given that they had already observed that Mr. Scott had a weapon while sitting in his vehicle. Let's remember, this is an open carry state. So the presence of a weapon does not pose an immediate threat to police officers. Now, there's multiple ways that this could have been handled, but we're going to see how this plays out moving forward.
When you say there were multiple chances for a de-escalation, what do you mean?
Well, it's just reported that these officers left the scene, put on their protective equipment, undercover officers, and came back and then engaged Mr. Scott after they already had identified that he had a weapon. So that in and of itself tells you, one, they could have just said, this is an open carry state. Mr. Scott has some marijuana. This isn't even relevant for us to be engaging. They weren't even there to deal with him. They were there on a surveillance to serve a warrant. I've been undercover. I've worked in these situations. I've worn plain clothes. And this doesn't seem like this should have been the right priority, dealing with the situation that they were there to deal with in the first place. Further, this underscores the importance of knowing who you're dealing with in the community. This man is an upstanding citizen. This man was someone who was a husband and a father and someone who didn't have any issues with the community. Okay? So if these officers knew and if there had been a better understanding of who was in these communities before they go in and take enforcement action, they would have never had this situation in the first place. But further, looking at this as a whole and looking at the totality of these circumstances, understand that there were multiple circumstances, there were multiple instances here for these officers to de-escalate this situation or completely take a different approach.
Charlotte Police Chief Kerr Putney just said a short time ago that Scott was in possession of marijuana and a gun and that this was an issue of public safety.
Well, I don't know where someone smoking marijuana becomes an issue of public safety. I mean, come on. We have to look at the facts here. We have to look at this in the totality of what we're talking about. But someone smoking marijuana and having a weapon in an open carry state, I don't know where this becomes a public safety issue. Now, in a lot of other states, marijuana is legal as well. So let's look at this as a whole and not continue to tote a narrative that doesn't tell the full story. Okay. These officers had multiple circumstances or multiple points where they could have taken a different approach, and they didn't, and now Mr. Scott is dead.
Dimitri, I want you to hang on if you can with us for just a moment. I want to bring in our reporter on the ground there, Errol Barnett, who was inside the press conference when the news was released that the police chief would actually release both of these videos to us. Errol, what has the reaction been on the ground? I'm concerned about protesters. We heard the police chopper above you a short time ago. Is there a heightened sense that things are going to pick up tonight?
I think so, Rena. We've now relocated to the law offices of those representing the Scott family. We've been waiting for the past 30 minutes to hear from them. They, like us in the media, are likely still digesting this new footage released by the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. In that footage, as I'm sure you've seen by now, you can kind of sync up the sequence of events if you add it on to what Rekia Scott shot and released on Friday. In the body cam footage, you can now see clearly that police officers surrounded Mr. Scott's car. Police Chief Putney said that he was in his vehicle in possession of marijuana, noticed by police officers as they were waiting to deliver an arrest warrant to a different resident of the apartment complex. Once they saw that Mr. Scott had a weapon, they said he raised it. They then decided to leave the area and come back in tactical gear. It's why you see the police officers casually dressed but wearing bulletproof vests. The police officers tried to bust open the rear passenger window with a baton, ordering Mr. Scott to drop the gun. He apparently didn't comply. They continued to move around the vehicle. Mr. Scott then did exit the driver's side, standing with his back to one police officer and his side to the officer with the body cam. At that moment, the officer goes behind a vehicle parked next to Mr. Scott's, and you can see things from the dash cam video. In that perspective, it appears as if the officer wearing the red t-shirt and bulletproof vest is holding up his gun. It's at that point that shots are fired, and you can see Mr. Scott crouch inward and fall over. It's unclear which officer, just based on the video, fired the fatal shot, but the police chief told us today that only one officer fired that shot, and it is the African-American officer who is now on administrative leave. But I will say that in the body cam video, it's clear that by the time the police officer comes around the vehicle parked next to Mr. Scott's, by the time he is on the ground, you can see the African-American officer in the distance coming from behind yet another vehicle. So although the police chief made it clear today that this is being released in the interest of transparency and that no one piece of evidence makes this case, he also said that none of his officers will be charged for this and they were acting within the law. It does seem that if you think of this from the perspective of protesters who've been taken to the streets here in Charlotte day after day, this very well could fuel the idea that this was an excessive use of force, because at no point in any of these videos do you see Mr. Scott with a weapon in his hand or raise and point it at any stage, something the police chief acknowledged once again today. But I pushed the chief and I asked him, can you assure the Scott family, his 7 children and his widow, that every effort was made to use as little force as possible? And he simply said that those officers perceived an imminent threat and because of that acted appropriately. So there doesn't appear to be evidence that would show without a doubt that Mr. Scott posed a threat, but the police department here is adamant that they acted appropriately. It's unclear if protesters will believe that. It's a Saturday night here in Charlotte. We expect the streets to be filled as they were earlier today.
Errol Barnett, CBS News correspondent on the ground there in Charlotte. Thank you, Errol. I want to ask Dimitri Roberts, former Chicago police officer. Dimitri, what can the city of Charlotte do now?
Well, I know what they better do. They better start being much more transparent, and they better start coming up with some better explanations than what they have to this point, because this is an over-aggression of police interactions towards this individual. Now, I'm looking at this video, and I've been in some very, very tough situations working on the south side of Chicago, have had multiple felony arrests of people that had guns on them, that were fleeing with weapons. None of them resulted in anyone being killed. there was points here where officers could have engaged Mr. Scott from a much different perspective. They could have put their weapons away. They could have just tackled him. There, at 17 seconds on the first video, the officer is standing almost behind Mr. Scott when he gets out of the car. He could have very easily had engaged him, put his weapon away. Mr. Scott was looking away to whatever was going on in front of him, which probably is the direction from which he got shot. He could have tackled him from behind. There's so many things that can be unpacked here. But again, let's look at this from the very top of this situation. These officers made a decision to leave the scene, come back, and engage Mr. Scott with the thought that he was doing something wrong and he was doing something illegal. And at this point, the only thing that they can come up with to say that he was doing wrong was smoking marijuana. And I don't think that that's a solid justification for Mr. Scott to be dead.
So many questions still after both the body cam and dash camera footage, and then yesterday, the video that was released by Keith Scott's wife as well. Dimitri Roberts, thank you.
Thank you.